I've been consulting with a lot of people about how you can protect yourself if you're targeted by ICE. And this video is specifically for people who've been in the US for more than 10 years continuously, who have US citizen children or a US citizen spouse or US citizen parents or permanent resident children, spouse, and parents. And you've been a person of good character in the US, which means no serious criminal history. And ideally, you've been paying taxes and contributing to the United States. If you meet these requirements, this video is for you. So some of you may already know where I'm going with this, and the answer is cancellation of removal. So if you are placed into deportation proceedings, those three requirements I mentioned, that you've been here for 10 years, of good character, and you have a qualifying family member, whether it's a child, spouse, or parent, who's a permanent resident or US citizen, you can qualify for a defense from removal, a defense from deportation, called cancellation of removal. So basically, once we go in front of an immigration judge and the judge asks, what defense are you seeking from removal? The response that I'll give is, Judge, we're seeking cancellation of removal. My client's been in the US for more than 10 years, has good character, we have some evidence of that, and has a qualifying family member. But that last one, the qualifying family member, has a massive caveat. You must demonstrate that your removal from the United States will serve an extreme and unusual hardship on that qualifying family member. So what's an example of extreme and unusual hardship? I'm gonna give an example, but you might have something that doesn't rise to this level of extreme and unusual, and you might still have a winning case. And the reality is that we're gonna have to make the strongest case we can out of your situation if you end up in removal proceedings. So extreme and unusual means, at the very least, more hardship than a normal qualifying family member will experience from you getting removed from the United States. For example, let's say you have a child who has some sort of physical disability, some sort of severe disability. This child will suffer more than just the depression and anxiety from losing a parent, the loss of income from losing a parent, the loss of companionship, the loss of family support from losing a parent who's deported. These three things would be considered normal consequences of removal, normal consequences of losing a parent. If you have a severely disabled child, they will experience much more than that because they are dependent on you as the parent much more than a normal child is. And in that situation, an immigration judge might find that your child will suffer extreme and unusual hardships. If the judge makes that determination and you otherwise qualify for cancellation of removal, the outcome can be that you become a permanent resident, which is interesting because you went from being fully undocumented, placed into removal proceedings, and then granted permanent residency. There have been a lot of shady legal service providers over the past 2 decades that have been trying to manipulate this system into getting people work permits and try to get them permanent residents, only to end up getting them deported because they didn't actually qualify. Because if you are denied cancellation of removal, the outcome will likely be a removal order, a deportation order from the United States, which is definitely placing you in a worse off position than you would otherwise be in if you were not placed into removal proceedings. So what can you do with this information? Well, first of all, if you have a qualifying family member and you've been in the US continuously for 10 years and a person of good character, gather evidence of those things and have them on standby just in case in an emergency you need quick access to all those records. Here's an example. If you have a child with some sort of health problem, contact your medical provider, the hospital, your physician, and do records request for all of your files. I don't care if it's 3,000 pages of medical records, begin the process of getting them now. This process can take weeks or months, And if ICE targets you and you're detained, you don't want to spend those weeks or months in a jail. And by the way, from jail or a detention facility, it is much harder to get those records together. So get everything in order now and create a plan for what will happen in the worst case scenario if ICE actually ends up targeting you. Now, another thing to consider, and I've mentioned this in other videos that I've recently posted over the last few weeks, is how to get released on bond if ICE targets you. So I've explained that people who are in removal proceedings might have an opportunity to get released on bond by ICE. That means you pay a certain amount of money and ICE releases you, and basically you pay this money to promise you're gonna come back to court and not run. And if you do come back to court and you comply with what the final outcome is, you'll actually end up getting your money back. And this can be as low as $1,500 or as much as $100,000. I've seen very regularly people who have no criminal history, but no real ties get a bond of $10,000 to $20,000. It's regional, it depends on where in the United States you're going to immigration court. But what happens if ICE denies your bond? If they just say, no, sorry, we're not gonna release you. We're supposed to get you out of the country as soon as possible, and keeping you in detention kind of puts some pressure on you, and it's more likely that you're just gonna voluntarily sign some paperwork to get removed without seeing a judge, which by the way happens all the time. You have an opportunity for a bond redetermination by an immigration judge, where a judge can redetermine whether you should be eligible for bond. And the judge will consider two things. One is whether you're a danger to the community. For that, it's pretty straightforward. Do you have any criminal history? Are you dangerous? Have you ever done anything that violates the law other than entering the United States without inspection? The second thing the judge is going to consider is whether you are a flight risk. If the judge releases you, are you going to actually come back to court? And there's a ton of things that the judge can consider here. Specifically, the judge is going to consider your ties to the community. Do you have children who are in school here? If you do, you're less likely to run. Do you have a job? Have you been employed for many years at the same employer? If you have, you're less likely to run and just like disappear into the interior of the United States. But a thing that judges also consider is what are the chances of you being granted relief from removal? Do you have a strong case? If the judge releases you and you have a strong case, you're way more likely to come back to court. And so for that, I like to have all the evidence ready and say, hey judge, this person has a job, they've been employed with the same employer for years, they have a house, they have kids that go to school here, and the kids are like in high school, he needs to take care of his kids, he's not gonna run, and he qualifies for cancellation of removal. And here's a basic version of the application with all of the evidence showing that he's eligible for cancellation of removal and has actually a strong case and he wants to litigate that case. In that situation, I think the immigration judge is much more likely to grant a bond and grant the lowest bond that that judge would be willing to grant under those circumstances. So anyway, guys, this is all just a roundabout way of saying if you qualify for cancellation of removal, get all your documents together now. Don't wait until it's an emergency, because if it is an emergency and I get a call and you're detained, what I'm gonna wanna do is see what defenses you qualify for, and I'm gonna try to get all the paperwork together so that we can prepare a bond redetermination hearing application. All right, guys, so that brings us to the end of today's video. I do a lot of videos about family-based immigration, naturalization, some deportation defense stuff, and lately a lot of stuff on policy changes under Trump. I focus my immigration practice on family-based immigration and naturalization, specifically marriage-based green cards, petitions for parents, petitions for children, and naturalization. If you're interested in any of these topics, be sure to schedule a consultation directly with me. I'd be happy to assist you. Also, if you think you might qualify for cancellation of removal and you want to do a consultation with me to help prepare you and your family for any worst case scenario, be sure to schedule a consultation. Otherwise, subscribe to my channel and I'll see you guys next time for another video.